I need this. Say that again, Eileen.
Okay, so
I like the affect that this creates now of like recording and then like, yeah, say that again.
okay. So no, I just got back from I was gone 4 days and I did 2 cities and 5 events with 3 different kind of groups, entirely different, somewhat different. So I've just been crushing it with liberating structures. And the master class has been given me the confidence to trust the process, because I would not, without that recital that we did, I would not have felt as confident. So it's been an absolute game changer for me.
Well, that's the best case scenario, right? Is, I mean, everything about it is sort of optimized to like maximize on like the sensation of like, you can do this, it'll be okay, right?
Yeah.
That's good to see that is like getting the intended outcome, especially of you feeling like you can go for it and like spread these things around.
Yeah. And I think, with the help of you and others in LS, it's sort of been like me focusing on the 20% that don't want to participate. Like what I'm finding is when I talk to like the boss, there's a core group of people that are not enrolled, not on board, actively resisting the direction of the organization. Sure. And what happens is we plan these days. I'm a well-being expert, so we talk about well-being in the workplace, and they end up, not coming. So what you have is this group of really engaged people, creating some new norms going forward without the naysayers there. So it's been kind of interesting, just moving, like the train is moving. Right. Idea. So not putting any energy into it, I guess, is the liberating piece.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like really ironic, right? Because on one hand, what I recognize about that is the way in which my attention gets really caught up in the people that are like not feeling it, right? And the way in which, like a lot of things, there's an infinite amount of care and energy that you can expend on them, right? Like, so weird metaphor, like I arranged this game of trash tag where me and a bunch of nerds here in Amsterdam and in Berlin came and cleaned up and picked up a bunch of trash in Wester Park where I live, and Trop Tower, whatever. I don't live in Berlin Park. And what you notice is like there's an infinite amount of care that you can express in any way, whether that's picking up trash or in your context of like organizational change and doing stuff, right? But of course, the rub is that, our capacity to care is limited as human beings, right? We got 24 hours in a day. Maybe of those 24 hours, I might be able to give a fuck 8, if I'm honest. I might be able to express that care. So like being selective and where you're going to find like a good return on investment is real tricky. So it's cool though that it's sort of working out, that you are expressing the care where it is getting good return on investment.
Yeah, and I never thought of it like that I'm actually continuing my nursing practice in this way. I'd never put that two together before. That is really cool. Expanding the role of nursing.
Word. Say more.
Yeah. Well, just, this is why I'm on the planet, since I was 11, I wanted to be a nurse. And so to kind of be with people, to me, it's accompanying people when they're vulnerable and suffering. That's kind of the whole piece. And so what I'm noticing in the workplace is there's real suffering going on. And there's a lot of, and it's around communication, kind of dysfunction. It's not pay, it's not hours. At least recently, a lot of times it is hours and pay in the hospital setting. But in these academic settings, it's really people not feeling valued, feeling disrespected, not having fun at work, and that's the tragedy to me, like not enjoying this more.
Right.
So I'm doing it. I'm accompanying people, and then not only that, but alleviating suffering, right? Like having these kind of, I guess they're like rivulets out or portals out of the dysfunction. I mean, I think that's what is beginning to happen here. I think, we'll see over time what happens, but like the portal to freedom is to like not tolerate, let's create new team norms around civility. Like that's a
Right.
portal to freedom.
Totally, totally. And I mean, like just thinking about the Triz on that, right? Just automatically, right? Like once you make those things explicit, like I was talking to somebody the other day, and the transformation is sometimes subtle. Like sometimes it's really subtle. Sometimes it's just like, oh, we have now observed this about ourselves, and just in observing it, things start to like sort of start to jiggle and move around automatically. Like the way when you look at a mirror, when I see my reflection, I can't help but like, oh, hold on, stand up straight,
Yeah.
suck it in, it's just
Self-correct. Yeah.
yeah, it's just automatic. So like then like the big initiative actiony things that normally I think about, like yeah, for sure we can do that on top of that all day long. But just in sort of having the conversation, holding the space, and then like that subtle reconfiguration starts to happen. But it's really interesting as well that you're applying liberating structures in healthcare, because that is actually like in a very serious way. That's like one of the most native contexts for liberating structures. Like I don't know if have we talked about like the canon of like where they came from?
No, I actually don't understand that.
Yeah, okay. So liberating structures, most of these tools that we're using have a pretty long history somewhere else. Like Triz has its origins in this theory of creative change that sort of came out of like Russia and the Soviet era. Um, and when we use Triz, we are using like the most simplified version you could humanly imagine of what is actually like this incredibly deep like theory of creative change,
Uh-huh.
um, and of problem solving. Excuse me. Um, Conversation cafe, open space technology, like a lot of these structures have like entire traditions that are associated with them. Appreciative interviews as well, that actually shares a similar provenance of like personal narrative inquiry, that is like incredibly deep rabbit holes. My point being is that these two nerds, Keith McCandless and Henry Lipmanovitz. I almost said Keith Lipmanovitz. That would have been funny. They were working in the healthcare context in doing some organizationally consultancy changey things, and when they crossed paths with each other and just sort of like checked a similar vibe or a similar way of working. I should say a similar way of working more than a similar vibe. If those two dudes are incredibly different. I've had the opportunity to interact with both of them. Keith is exactly like, I think he represents in many ways the stereotype of the community better, in that like he's a mega hippie, like a super warm, just like incredibly welcoming guy. And Henry, I don't know, depending on where he comes from, he is a much more like straight-laced and kind of stoic dude. His background is he was the CEO of Maersk, like the global shipping company, right? So his from his perspective, like I get the feel of like just extraordinary, like down to earth pragmatism. Like, as you can imagine, in the industry of like moving stuff about the planet, like that's
Right.
very
And also
straightforward.
grounded in big corporate culture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right. And from a leadership perspective, but also, the desire from that corporate culture of better outcomes, right? Just very simply like, hey, we're trying to like win the game, the infinite game of being in business for a long, long time. How do we
Mhm.
do that? We do that by engaging with people in ways that, gets the best the information on the table and enables us to make good use of everybody's brains in the room. So
Mhm.
they sort of they crossed paths in the healthcare context. I'm not sure if it was here in the States or if it was in South America or some shit like that. But that's when they sort of crossed paths, and they codified this collection of tools, the similar tools that they were using, into this design language that we now know as liberating structures. So in a very real way, like you're taking it back to to where they belong, quote unquote.
Interesting.
So,
Well, maybe that's why they're so incredibly effective. And I'm sort of surprised by how I hate this word really, but like compliant people are. Everyone does it. They just get up and do what they're told, and you realize, like, wow, it surprises me. There's nobody resisting or wanting to change the menu or ask for a substitute. Yeah.
You'll wait for it. Those times will come, but
nobody has challenged me yet. Yeah.
No, well, I mean, that has a lot to do with like role in the goal of the context, right? From my experience, and where am I at? So I apply them in like the Scrum Mastery, Agile Coachy, product development with nerds environment. And so since everybody there has an opinion about the way things should be done, and I'm just another dude with an opinion, I find myself often like wrestling with other people a bit more. But what I do know is that if I can create the case that, hey, I have thought about this, I have a plan about how to go from current reality to outcome, and I've put in like X hours in preparation of like each individual step and how we're going to go from this initial state to the problem state, and with a high probability of win, it's usually hard to, or maybe it's a better way of saying this, I'm hard to convince otherwise that you have thought more about exactly how to make good use of everybody's time together. And because of that, because I'm so cocksure and convinced, like I just won't let myself be dissuaded. But it's awesome that people are like going with the flow and just that sounds like a
so in other words, what you're
space.
saying is that you identify as an expert on process, not on the issue or the outcome. It's the process that you hold on to.
Yeah, I'm really taking the role of facilitator to a pretty extreme degree. Like what I think in the environments that I'm playing with, the last thing that's actually needed is somebody else with an opinion on the decision to be made, like the thing. Like most everybody has lots of opinions on that, and in fact the thing that's most helpful is just to have at least one person in the room that is mildly disinterested in whether we decide to go to New York for a summer vacation or California. Like, hey, as long as we go somewhere, awesome, yay, good time. So yeah.
So I've been listening to the podcast that you recommended, workshops, and it's been
workshops work.
Yeah, workshops work, and have never identified.
Shout outs to Miriam Hadness.
Yes, it's a good one, and her guests are great. But like the idea that I haven't identified as a facilitator, I'm a coach, I'm a nurse practitioner, and so I'm moving into this space, and really the word just means to make easy, right? Like facile, like that word. And so when you do these events, do you spend a lot of time ahead of time prepping with like the boss? Because I have not defined the outcome when I do these, because I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on both the role, the goal, and the context. I try and be pretty like rigorous about being process driven in terms of like what's the outcome that I'd like to people more or less to walk away with. But that has more of, when I say outcome, I notice there's a part of me that's like, that's not actually it, right? It's not so much about going there, but just like a sense of progress and maybe a sense of direction. Like the outcome is that way-ish, and I want to make sure that we move that way-ish. And maybe the outcome is not the right outcome, but I definitely want to have like the emotional sense of like wind in my hair, because that means we're moving, right?
Okay. So for me, at least a lot of the work I'm doing is the outcome like a beginning conversation on creating a culture of wellness on this team, in this organization. Like it's pretty loose. It's to begin a conversation, because it's never really been had before, actually.
Wow,
That's
incredible.
too loose.
I mean, no, I mean, I think you can definitely that feels like an extraordinarily concrete deliverable, actually. Like to start a to open a space for dialogue around that which has not been discussed. That's actually not only is that very specific, but that's also super high value, right? Because it's the things that we don't talk about that end up like sort of dominating the relational space, right? Which is
Yeah.
which on a like on a commentary perspective is damn fucking ironic, right? The fact that, you know, it's the thing that I don't talk about because I don't want it to take up space, so to speak. I don't want it to exist. And by not talking about it, that's what actually causes it to sort of grow. It provides the exact conditions for it to become
So
bigger and bigger.
ignoring it is feeding it. This is all like really good stuff.
Yeah, totally, totally. I mean,
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. So, all right. So that's really helpful. So one of the things, can I just pimp you for information?
Hold on. We got another person here in the waiting room. Let's see who Tola is. But yeah, for sure. We can just keep going. We'll see what Tola has to say. We can jump into the structure. GM Tola, welcome to the Wise Crowd design call. Are you feeling wise today?
Hi, yeah, I'm fine, thank you. I've never attended one of these calls before. I'm not sure what
Cool.
to expect. I'm very
Yeah.
surprised I'm the only one here.
I mean, not quite the only one, right? I mean, we're here. Like, there's three of
Hi.
us. Like,
Hi, Tola.
three,
Hi.
you know, three is a solid crew where I come
It
from.
is, yeah.
Like
Hmm.
we are. Little did you know, like we
It's
are
a
the
crowd,
beginning.
isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. We could be a party, as a matter of fact. So.
Yeah.
Um, well, Tola, then let me help set a little bit of context for you since you're new to the space. What we usually do here is a give and get help call, using the liberating structure of wise crowds. Where are you sort of coming from? How did you find yourself here in the space?
I received an invite. I've had invites in the past and have never been able to attend.
Okay,
I don't know who are you Jeremy? No.
I am Jeremy.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so you sent me the invite.
Okay.
That's
Are
all I
you so
know. That's all I
you
know.
might okay, then you probably signed up for the meetup page then. So that
Maybe. Um, yeah, maybe. I sit within business agility,
yep.
um, at Accenture. So
At
yeah.
Accenture. Okay, check that out.
Hmm.
That's very
Yeah.
interesting. So this
Okay.
all right, cool. Well, yep, I am a business agility person as well. I'm no longer with Accenture. Um,
Okay.
so that's interesting that this somehow is still on your calendar. I'm
Hmm.
I'm I'm I find that actually delightful. But what we
Oh,
usually do is a give and get help session in
okay.
this call around liberating structures. Have you played around with liberating structures before?
No, I've never heard of him.
Okay. Liberating structures are a pattern language of sort of like facilitation tools and techniques that
Right.
are quite popular within, at least here in the Netherlands, especially with Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, release train engineers, business agility, blah, blah, blah. They do a real good job of acting as facilitation tools, is what Eileen and I have been sort of talking about, and, including and unleashing everyone. Um, so what we usually do here in this space is we use a specific liberating structure called wise crowds, and what that does is get it helps basically address a help request or some form of question that we have. So the way that might work is Eileen may have some form of like, hey, I'd like advice, consultation. I'd like you guys to help me think about this thing. And so she would just take a couple minutes, 2 minutes usually, to just explain, hey, this is my question. This is what's going
Hmm.
on. And then we would take 2 or 3 minutes to ask her some clarifying questions and, tell me a little bit more about this, tell me a little bit more about that. And then after that 2 or 3 minutes, in this context, Eileen would then mute herself and turn off her webcam. And then you and I would just have a conversation about, hey, we've now got the question, we've got some clarification. This might be our advice, or this is a story that it reminds me of. This is how I've done something like that in the past, sort of spanning the gamut from, consultation, coaching, mentorship, so to speak. And we would take usually about 8 minutes or something along those lines to have that conversation. And after that point, we'd ask Eileen, importantly, that whole time, she's just sort of listening and taking notes to our dialogue. At which point she would come back and say, you know what? Tola, when you mentioned this part, that was really interesting. That got me thinking about all this other stuff. And I think I can really use these pieces of information. So and then we would just take a minute to get that hot take from her. And then in this context, we can usually rotate and get in a couple different help requests over the course of the 90 minutes that we usually have booked here for this call. And away we go, having practiced with a specific liberating structure. And what we often find is that in this context, we're also able to give advice about, hey, these are specific tools that you might want to use to address your help request as well. And so we tend to sort of also focus a lot and offer additional tools that you can use to address whatever help request you've got. So
Okay, got you.
Does that sound like your kind of party?
Yeah. So I suppose, does your audience vary then from how often does this call run? Is it every week?
Yeah, we run this call every week.
And I guess the audience varies depending on who has a problem and who joins with a problem.
Exactly. Whoever shows up for the right people. So sometimes, like last week, it was a very agile, agile consultant coachy question. But sometimes it's larger change management, like big picture intervention questions. Sometimes they have nothing to do with the the business topic du jour. For example, we had a guy a few weeks ago come in and ask us about a process of dialogue that he was running for his intentional community, like his neighborhood, more or less. So what we're really trying to do is just figure out, hey, how can we go from I have a problem to think together about a structured step-by-step organized way of addressing that problem that people can then go and use.
Cool. Okay. Wow, there is something that I'm trying to think about and could do with some help on.
Cool. Awesome.
I don't know if I can share that. There's a particular, I'm just looking at the body of the invite. It seems like there's a structure I should follow. Should I follow this structure? So place.
Yeah. Oh, the design brief.
Purpose.
Yeah, for sure. This is.
Should I share it in that way?
If you want to, I mean, you can either just tell us the story, however you think, and I'll ask you the clarification questions along those lines. Do that. What I do want to say is, like, this is also a call that I record and we upload on YouTube. So make sure you sort of like strip out client names and context, all of that stuff. We want to make sure that we're clean and we don't have any liability on those lines. But yeah, if you've got a help request, give it to us, man. We'd love to
awesome.
to help out.
So I'm currently working as an Agile coach for a marketing team within a large financial services organization. This is new for me because I've never been an Agile coach in a marketing team before. So everything that I guess in a traditional kind of product-centered environment, you would expect them to be familiar with, like the role of a product owner, feature development, user stories. All of these things are completely foreign to them, and they're also irrelevant because they're not developing products. They are driving and delivering marketing campaigns.
Yep.
So that's kind of a bit of context about them. Now, my role as an Agile coach covers, as is typical, a number of different areas. I do a bit of training facilitation. I do some role support and role-based coaching for new individuals or individuals within their organization who have kind of rotated to a Scrum Master role, for example. So I do a lot of role-based coaching. I do some leadership coaching as well. And a question that recently came up from a member of the marketing leadership team was around how they can implement better portfolio management. Now, I have a good understanding of Lean Portfolio Management and have like a wealth of material that I could share with them. They specifically asked for a kind of a playbook, a portfolio management playbook that they could be talked through and then have as a kind of takeaway for their team, their leadership team, to kind of have a copy of, digest offline and think about, and then consider how they might incorporate some of this stuff into the way they're currently working at a leadership level. So one ask was the playbook. And as I started to pull together this playbook, I came up with some questions because I think they are really interested in implementing Lean Portfolio Management for their marketing organization. But based on, my experience with LPM, you really need to kind of cut across all the different departments within an organization, because your portfolio is not just made of marketing, because ultimately they are supporting and handing over into other parts of their organization. So they're not responsible for the product development, but they need to know what products are being developed in order to market them adequately. So there's a lot of touch points with other parts of the organization, but I think the marketing leadership team are very much considering LPM across the marketing vertical of their organization. So my question is really like, how can I really support them in this ask? Do I need to get them to think bigger and think more horizontally across the different parts of their organization in order to really make LPM successful? Or are there parts of, the theory within Lean Portfolio Management that would be useful for them to consider, given that my scope as a coach and the scope of the Accenture team on the ground is really focused on just the marketing part of the organization? Does that make sense?
That's a good start. So now we're going to sort of open up the space for clarifying questions. So Eileen, Sherry's coming in hot, so hold on to your butt. Clarifying questions. What sort of comes to mind? What I notice I am interested in is sort of how long have you sort of been in this context? Is this relatively new environment, or?
It's been about 2.5 months.
Okay. And do you have any sense for like why this particular ask around portfolio management has sort of come up?
Yeah, so the leadership team continue to repeat their desire to link strategy to execution. And there is a continual kind of pain point amongst the teams on the ground that they don't understand the purpose of what they're delivering. They don't know the so what. They don't understand the value that their delivery is having on the business as a whole. There's two things. It's kind of top down and bottom up.
Okay, so there's some missing link, and is that specific to the marketing context, or do you think that's is more symptomatic of an organization wide?
It's really difficult to say because I've only been engaged with the marketing organization, because that was what we were, as a team, that's what we were brought on for. So I've not had any conversations with anyone outside of marketing.
Okay. Any additional clarifying questions, Eileen, Sherry?
Yeah, I guess I was also thank you, Tola. It's nice to see you, meet you. Yeah, like what problem is this trying to solve? It's kind of feeds off of what Jeremy was saying. Like, is this the right solution to the problem that they're having? I guess a different way of asking that question. And how does this portfolio fix that problem?
So some of the challenges that the leadership team have been talking about are that there are many ideas that are kind of brought to the table for them to work on, and they'd like a way of kind of filtering through those ideas and understanding which ideas are going to be of most value, and then making sure that what the teams on the ground are doing is actually, you know, linking up correctly to the ideas or the epics of the highest value. They also want to kind of eliminate the constant kind of scurrying around that's going on at the ground, on the team level, sorry, when it comes to last minute requests that don't actually tie back to any bigger picture, because there's a lot of requests that are being made of the team that don't fit in. So that, for example, they will do quarterly planning, and then they will go off and spend the time working, and like 80% of what they do within that 3-month period or that quarter is related to what they planned and is directly aligned to what they planned in. But then there's that 20% that comes in as an off-plan request that various leaders within the organization will say, this is super urgent, please put this in, really need to do this. And when they try and accommodate those at a team level, it's kind of throwing them off slightly. It's it's causing them some burnout. And it's also derailing their in-flight plans to deliver what they had, you know, planned to do in the quarter. So,
and Tola,
yeah.
what worries you most about this?
I think what worries me most about it is probably that there isn't a huge amount I can do to support them if I also can't answer whether these off-plan requests are truly urgent. You know, I don't have that clarity either as to what the teams are doing and what they're actively engaged in. You know, has to do with what the overall strategy is for the marketing organization. But I don't have that knowledge either. So that worries me too.
Very cool. We've got a couple questions from Sherry in the chat, and the most recent of which is, what's their current way of sort of sizing and estimating in terms of value?
Yeah. Do you mean sizing the work at a team level, or sizing what exactly?
Let's see. There is both a yes, and I have both more around the value, like the potential impact of this work.
Okay.
I think both of those are important.
Okay, so prior to our team kind of hitting the ground, there was estimation happening, but it was estimation in terms of days. So how many days is this particular piece of work going to take? We have moved them towards relative estimation to help them kind of get quicker estimates out, because to be honest, what has been happening is that they would estimate in terms of days. They'd be like half a day or 2 days off that, and then, you know, leadership would come down on their shoulders like a ton of bricks, complaining about why something wasn't done when it was supposed to be done. When in reality, you know, as we know, there are many things that are kind of unknown at the point of starting out, especially if you're working in these short incremental cycles. So we have, as part of our pilot, been moving them away from actual estimates and closer towards relative estimates. Still very difficult to do because of the type of work they're doing. It's quite hard to do the relative estimation because they're not developing products, but we're sort of figuring that out. In terms of the value, it's a blank. I mean, it's unknown. I don't think they are thinking about, you know, what is the value of each of the items that they're delivering. There is certainly at the moment no process to determine that value either. And I think they'll struggle to do that until, as I say, that like there is alignment throughout as to the purpose of what they're doing.
Okay. And Sherry has a question about the value, or about the main services currently. And that's, I think, just to summarize, we're in a marketing context within a financial services context.
Yeah, that's correct.
And was there another question, Sherry? clarify what top-down and horizontal mean in this context.
So when I say top down, I mean like the leadership team, the marketing leadership team, through the kind of program level of kind of campaign owners and campaign delivery managers, down to the team members who are comprised of copywriters, user experience designers, graphic designers, communication planners, brand owners, who actually do the work to make a campaign go live. And then horizontal, I think what I mean by that is that the marketing organization is only one section of the organization as a whole, because they have digital, they have like product delivery, they have like legal, which is not really a vertical because legal support all the different areas, but there's various like parts of the financial organization. Marketing is just like one part of it, and that's what I mean by when I'm talking about horizontal. I think I mean, across, if you cut across all the different verticals within the organization.
So that gives us, I think, some good surface area to have a conversation. So what I'll ask you, Tola, is go ahead and mute yourself and turn off your webcam, and Eileen, Sherry, and I will have a conversation about your help request, and hopefully something interesting pops out of that for you. Awesome. So it's funny. My very first rodeo as a proper Agile coach was actually in a marketing context. So this brings back fond memories, so to speak. And for us, it was like just the standard stuff, like all these different, when she talks about branding and campaigns and then the online element, like in the context I was in, none of those nerds were talking to each other actually. And the simplest innovation was just like create a shared calendar that operated as the backlog of like, hey, these are when things are being shipped. And now you can see what, based on that delivery date, where your chunk of work will sort of have to fit into that larger context. And for those guys, this question that you asked, Sherry, around estimating value turned out to be like the most tricky and interesting rabbit hole about, sort of using really what I can only describe as like much more of like a lean startup mentality around validation of hypothesis and running minimum viable experimentation to just at least get any approximation about this thing big important, that thing less important. But I want to come back to a more traditional question, which is, when you think about what you've heard so far, what are the structures especially that jump out into your mind about that might help Tola address her question around portfolio management?
Triz, crowdsourcing, maybe celebrity interview.
Sweet. Can we unpack those a little bit, since she may not have that's jargon at this point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I guess, I think about it as, being from healthcare, that we don't even begin to try to solve a problem until we understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of portfolio thing just feels like the wrong solution to the wrong problem to me, or it might be, but it's super unclear. So to start that whole thing to solve the wrong problem, that it's like to me, it feels like a technical solution to an adaptive problem, which is a trap that so commonly fall into. So I feel like the group needs to be engaged more to define what the real problem is. And if they, had a magic wand and could solve this problem, one or two things they could do, what would they do to fix it? And I'm not sure the portfolio would be the solution. they're having communication problems, or they're not planning for this 20% of chaos at the end, or whatever it is. So yeah, Triz could be used to describe what are our worst practices. This kind of last minute urgency seemed like a real pain point. And so what are our worst practices? Like, we don't plan for it, we get rude to each other, all that, like listing all that out. And then the celebrity interview might be getting the big top gun if there's a disconnect between upper and lower levels in the organization, to have a really fun interview, and then have people from the audience create questions that they've always wanted to know, so that there's just a better understanding and open communication between the top level of the organization. And then what else did I say? Oh, crowdsourcing. And this works really well when you just ask everybody to write down on an index card one solution to this problem. The people that are affected with the problem, that's to me like the definition of an adaptive problem. People with the problem are involved in solving it, and everybody write down the best solution they have, and then they switch the cards around and rate them, and then the top 3 or 5 answers then become, perhaps actionable or explored further.
Cool. Let's add some additional surface area there. So for that 25-10 crowdsourcing, after we write down our solutions, what we would do is we'd go through 5 different rounds of scoring. So we would trade cards basically at random 5 times in a row and score the cards that I'm left with. So in this context, I end up with Eileen's card, and I would score her card on a scale of 1 to 5. And so that every card conceivably would have 5 different scores of 1 to 5 from 5 different people, basically at random. And then we would say, all right, based on the group's evaluation, these are the top scoring. These are the ideas that we more or less think are the best. And Sherry's got her hand up for some time as well. Let's see. Appreciative inquiry for the leaders. Oh, very interesting. Yep, totally. And for psychological safety, most definitely. So appreciative inquiry or interviews would sort of lean in the exact opposite direction of that exercise Triz that Eileen mentioned. So if Triz asks us to really lean into how we could create the worst possible outcome, then thinking in the future about how to create problems versus thinking in the past what led to success. So appreciative inquiry usually leads a dialogue around how do we tell a story about a time where we actually, did deliver on time, or we tell a story about a time that went the way you want this time to go, more or less. If you imagine, it's the best first date strategy in the world. Like, tell each other a time about, when you had the best first date in the universe. If I do that and you do that, then, then conceivably we now have all of the information to have the best first date both of us can possibly imagine. So appreciative inquiry and appreciative interviews might lean into that sentiment. I'd also like to upregulate the idea of celebrity interview, and also think about the context of some form of user experience fishbowl. Like there is a contentious discussion, right? If I think about this context, which we have a plan, lots of action is going into executing on that plan, and then this other thing pops up and it's really important. There is I understand that somebody says this is really important, but what do other people think, right? And that's typically the challenge that I think we're trying to solve when we think about lean portfolio management, which is like, hey, we had an idea that this stuff is important, and then this other thing just sort of sneaks in, under the radar, and jumps up in priority. So how might I be able to create a space where that conflict around priority sort of becomes a spectator sport, really? So the user experience fishbowl would ask, the way I think about it is, you know, if you just get to be a fly on the wall and listen to a cab ride between, you know, George Soros and Warren Buffett, like George Soros and Warren Buffett are sharing a cab ride home from the airport, and you just get to listen in on that dialogue, and then jump into some breakouts or have some dialogue of my own with another spectator of that conversation, and then sort of feed questions into back into the cab to input some clarification or sort of guide the dialogue between those nerds. So how could I turn that conflict around priority into some form of a spectator sport that, instead of happening sort of behind closed doors, to make that sort of visible, because that gives me good information about coming to my own conclusions as a booth on the ground, so to speak, as somebody on the floor, to decide, oh, okay, so this is this field of tension, and now that I know what's important and have some feel for it, this is what my conclusion be to that. And Sherry's got her hand as well. Sherry agrees with Eileen on first understanding the problem. Totally. And to do that, what might be a good structure? Another reason for appreciative inquiry. If I don't know my team, I try to get to know my team more for sure. So especially around understanding the essence of the problem first. One structure that jumps up to me that is perennially useful is the inquiry of 9 whys. And 9 whys is exactly like it sounds, like 5 whys plus 4 more, not to get to the root cause, but to understand the constellation of meaning and significance. You know, Tola mentioned that the so what is missing, and 9 whys is a very ideal structure to really fill in, like, oh, this is why this thing matters. So in the context, that marketing context that I was talking about initially, this was our standard operating procedure for all work that came in. It was like, all right, give us the 9 whys, otherwise it doesn't get on our backlog. We can't even begin to think about and estimate the work until we have a good feel for what the significant and potential impact of that work is. So boom, we've got Triz as a potential practice to help understand the problem space and a bit more. We've got appreciative interviews to try and focus a bit more on the past causes of success that we might be able to lean into and emphasize. We've got 9 whys to help understand the meaning and significance. We've got user experience Fishbowl plus celebrity interview to help create a forum for dialogue with leadership. Those seem like 3 or 4 or 5 pretty distinct structures that we could then use to understand the help request better and maybe lead to that solution or others. So at this point, Tola, come back in, turn off your webcam, turn your webcam back on, unmute yourself, and tell us what you thought of our exchange.
Hi, I didn't know that I was supposed to stay. I dipped out for a minute to get a drink. I didn't know. I thought I wasn't supposed to listen.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Good to know. My clarification wasn't great.
Yeah, sorry about that. I did hear. I think I heard some of the discussion at the beginning around understanding the problem. And I think that's really helpful, and potentially there's things I could do to dig a bit deeper, because potentially they've like arrived at the solution of Lean Portfolio Management and it may not be the right thing for them based on what their challenge is. That's the main thing I picked up, and I can see there's a few things in the chat. Should I read that?
Yeah, especially this last message from Sherry. So Triz, Appreciative Interviews, 9 Whys, User Experience, Fishbowl, and Celebrity Interview might be particularly good structures to help.
Okay, I've never heard of Triz before.
Yeah, Triz is a structure that revolves around the invitation of how is it that we would create the worst possible outcomes that we want to avoid. So ask folks to use that to help identify the things that they would rather stop. Right? If we think about what would create the worst possible conclusion, then the second step is, all right, how are we doing stuff that looks like that? You know, even in small ways.
Okay. Okay. Appreciative interviews. I don't think I've heard of that term before.
Yeah, appreciative interviews. These are all specific liberating structures. But appreciative interviews, also what it asks us to do is to tell a story about a time that we were successful. So to lean into more of a narrative-based inquiry that that builds on what has previously caused success. So,
okay. Cool, that makes sense. Yeah, I think those are good suggestions.
well, there you go.
I'm just writing them down.
That would be our inquiry of wise crowds then for your help requests.
Okay,
and
brilliant.
I know that Sherry or Eileen had mentioned that she came in with a help request. She's probably running to the toilet or something like that.
Yeah, no, I'm here. And I would just say, Tola,
Yeah.
interesting problem. And one thing that you might just do is just cut and paste the chat and put it in a Word so you can save it. Because once we hang up, it's okay.
Yeah,
so I have a couple, but I'm going to do the most urgent one first. Problem, and that is I am hired to do a monthly a program for 6 months, a 2-hour webinar to a group of professionals who identify by a I guess racial and ethnic group. And so they're mostly US based, but some of them are overseas. And I had my first one yesterday and it was sort of a disaster. It's supposed to be 600 to 700 people. And somehow the host only let 100 people in and they got capped. So we lost 15 minutes in that disaster. And that was not anything that was up to me. But when I did, and so part of this whole program is to engage people because they're all over the country and kind of the world. And it's to kind of get people of like mind talking to each other. And it's supposed to be, very culturally sensitive. And so, and it's around, well-being. And so the first, I thought about, and also they're not very technologically savvy. There's a lot of people at work on their phones, distracted. People are driving and it's super distracting to have everyone on camera. So the first, I wanted to do impromptu networking, and I thought it was just going to be too difficult technologically with everybody moving around. And so then when I did Triz, only like 2 of the groups understood what I meant. And they were talking about worst practices at their work. They were talking about things they do to set themselves straight, to nourish themselves. Like it was all over the place. And I had a slide. I was super specific about what this exercise was. And it was supposed to be, if this is the worst webinar series you could ever imagine, what would you be doing kind of question. It was about the series that we're promoting, we're doing. And they were answering got way off. And so I don't know if this is actually, what I'm supposed to do, because I was super clear. And the next exercise was kind of a version of Troika, and that went a lot better. But going forward, we're going to have 600 people. And so, the constraint is we only have 40 breakouts. And so what I need help with is how do I engage this group and using liberating structures without, being able to do small groups and not really knowing who's coming and what size. It's very, very chaotic and people with limited technical skills.
Clarifying questions. So I noticed that I get a lot of challenges, but what is the intended outcome that we're trying to accomplish in this context? What are we going for? I get
Well, it's a grant by to try to make healthcare practice more tolerable, well-being. It's a grant from a foundation who is concerned about healthcare providers committing suicide. And so it's kind of like, what do we do to promote our own well-being in the workplace?
all right. We've got strong technical challenges. Sherry's got a question. What helps you know what you're communicating with super clear?
When I do the debrief at the end and when people are posting in the chat box. So the way I set up Triz was each group come up with, 3 of the worst practices and post, have a scribe and post in the chat box. And they were just all over the place. And that's how I knew nobody understood the assignment. I fought long and hard, with the organization because they wanted to have a facilitator in each small group. And I thought that would really take away. And now I'm wondering if that was the right thing to do.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about the math on that. Yeah. So we got evidence that no one understood the assignment. I think Sherry's question kind of goes the other way around. So it wasn't, we know that it wasn't clear for them. So I guess how do we know the specific sort of spread between how clear your explanation was? I mean, we've got feedback that basically says, regardless of how clear my slide is, it didn't come back as clear. So I guess how do we figure out what that's what is causing that spread? And I think it's clear and they're not getting it.
And some people did too. Some of the groups did, not all.
Yeah. Okay. And then I'm thinking of trying to do the math of like 40 breakout rooms divided by 600 people.
Yeah, I think there's 600 registered, but we say maybe 400 will show. So that's 10 people in a room.
Yeah. Which 10 is a little big, but I do. Okay. And Sherry. Let's see. Does that mean you were not super clear? Yeah. Okay. And we're moving towards healthcare outcomes. Sherry, does that answer your question or do you still need some clarification? What concerns you about the disaster that just occurred?
Oh, that was just a tech problem with the host who somehow was not able to expand their limit to more than 100 participants. So it created a lot of chaos getting started because nobody could enter. And they were really upset about it. It was super, we lost a lot of, it was not a good start. It was just on their end. And I think that's just going to continue, just tech issues in general. So moving people around just creates, they're not used to it. This is the work that they do is very clinical. They're not used to this. They haven't been on Zoom the way the rest of us have.
Okay.
So it's just, my sense is it's going to have to be super simple going forward. And I've got 5 more to do. And what kinds of exercises can I do? I've got loads of content, but I really need to figure out these 10 people breakout rooms so that it's helpful and clear.
Keep it simple exercises. Will the tech issue impact psychological safety?
I don't know. They really liked the second troika a lot, so there was safety, but there were 3 in the rooms because we had a small group. So I can't go back to that. So we we'll have to say something about safe spaces and non-judgment before we do these groups.
does that need to be addressed on an emotional level? Do you mean like the previous session, Sherry, or going forward?
Well, the host, the woman that's in charge of the grant, was upset. Nobody else really cared because they were in the meeting, but I'm sure the people that didn't get in were upset. So we ended up recording it. So, but they would miss the small groups, etc. So that's getting fixed. So it's sort of like going forward, I need a plan, and I'm worried about it like a lot, because I want to do, I really am in service to them, and I want them to get a lot out of this. And I think the magic is going to happen in these small groups.
Okay. Any other clarifying questions? Yep. Where's the biggest pain right now?
Me feeling like they really trusted me, and they fought for me because I'm not of their ethnic group. And so I've been partnering with a guy who is, and making sure that it's sensitive. And one of the things they want me to break through is the people pleasing that seems to be part of their culture. They're very accommodating and appeasing. And so I want to deliver, because they fought for me, and I'm concerned about that.
Okay. Okay. Well, Sherry and I'll get to work.
Thank you.
So there's two questions that are really salient for me. So one is this explicit question about what are simple structures that can be delivered in this context, so lean into that simplicity. And then the second is much more about the sense of, for lack of a better word, performance anxiety that I notice is sort of present with Eileen, which is in some ways, this desire to do well is a driving force, that causes her to show up here and to get support for this. But there is a too much threshold for this anxiety to do well that causes it to be a positive feedback loop, in the sense of it just requires more and more and more and more attention, because I want to do so good, and I'm like policing myself, and I'm looking for verification when I would be better with my focus fully on the game at hand, and let the outcome be what the outcome. So around the simple structures in terms of facilitation, the first thing that comes up for me is not particularly simple. It's simple from a technical side, but it does give a little bit more strain to the group, and that is Conversation Cafe. So Conversation Cafe could work for, a group of 10 people, but it'll take much more time. But what I would say is that if you find that participants are distracted, I might consider some form of delta on, all right, if there are people listening at work or driving on their call in their car, they might not be able to actually participate in the dialogue. So that 10 per breakout room might actually shrink to 5 to 7 of actual engagement. In which case, both Conversation Cafe as well as Wise Crowds are pretty good structures. Wise Crowds will work with a group of 5 to 7. That's still a little big, but that's okay. Conversation Cafe as well. The Conversation Cafe is agnostic of content. It just is very much similar to impromptu networking and 1-2-4-all, in that it fits into the interaction procedure sort of bucket, the interaction game. And it just invites you to respond to whatever the invitation you dream up, go around the circle once with 1 minute per person, and then responding to the invitation, then go around the circle twice, a second time, responding to each other. So then you sort of point and call out each other. Oh, when you mentioned that, it reminded me of this, or I thought this part was insightful, and I'd like to speak to it. And then you open up the space for a little bit of an unstructured group discussion, being mindful. The challenge in your context might be, mindfulness to not speak over one another. So to encourage the group to use some form of talking object, and that in virtual space looks like, all right, I take the talking stick from you and I give the talking object back. You can also use that with a verbal cue like check. You may have heard me also use anyone else before. Those are two different verbal cues that let everybody else know that this time for talking is mine, and I relinquish it via saying check or via saying anybody else. And after, usually I think about if I had 5 people, you're going to go around the circle once is 5 minutes, around the circle twice is 10 minutes. I might say an equivalent amount of sort of unstructured group discussion using that talking object, and then around the circle one more time. So sort of sharing my takeaway, my final thought is another way of saying this. The important part is 1 minute per person. And you can sort of see that when I say from a facilitation perspective for your Zoom master, it's just put people into rooms for like 30 minutes each. But for the group, you're going to need somebody who basically understands the process of Conversation Cafe, and who can basically say, oh, hey, that's your 1 minute. Thanks. We're going to move on to the next person. Which might also help with your sort of implicit goal of this people pleasing. Like give them a specific structure that gives a constraint and says, hey, if people are outside the bounds of that structure, it's okay to interrupt them, right? That's a good practice thing. So that's what comes to mind. Wise crowds, no mystery there. And then there's this question of like, what do we do with our anxiety of like doing it? What comes to mind for you, Sherry? Are there any other structures that jump out to you that you think, or how might we like address our anxiety of being good enough? The liberating structure of doing a small experiment. Yeah. So instead of having 600 to 700 people to start with a smaller crowd, and then do the same thing you do with them to practice. Totally. And what I like about that as well is that's a nice combination in terms of like thinking about this group of people that you might want to, that might act as facilitators of this procedure for that larger group. If it turns out that this is a good thing in that group of, 30, 40, 50 people, then that might also seed some, oh, I can help explain this to everybody else into the larger context. I can help act as the facilitator or the host of the Conversation Cafe. Awesome. And I notice that Sherry also says, perhaps there's too many chaotic changes to deal with at once after the first disaster happened, but that's how you learn, no doubt. One of the things that, as I think about this question about how do I deal with my own anxiety of like performing and being good enough, then I also lean into the open space technology sort of principles. Whoever shows up are the right people. Whenever it starts is the right time. I mean, if so both of those apply to this disaster. I mean, hey, whoever shows up, whoever is able to make it into the call, those are the right people. Whenever it starts, whenever we actually get started, it might not be the time that we had scheduled. It might be after the kerfuffle of our panic about dealing with that issue. But whenever it starts is the right time. Whatever happens is the only thing that could have happened. So hey, this is how the chips fell. That's just the work, is to figure out a way to sit with that and make friends with that reality. Wherever it starts is the right place. And so for these people driving in their car, or half listening or not listening at work, wherever it starts is the right place. And whenever it's over, it's over. So if people drop out early, or if it takes longer than expected, those are the breaks. And of course, the law of 2 feet, that it's up to the people participating to determine whether or not participating is good use of their time as well. It's quite complicated on one hand, but I'm very curious, for a group the size of what you're talking about, like hundreds of people, open space technology is quite interesting, actually. Because it's literally impossible for you as any type of facilitator or host to plan the agenda with all of the things that everybody there is going to find relevant. So to figure out some way of either engaging with people asynchronously before the event to identify what are topics that they think are interesting, that they want to discuss around this topic of well-being and maybe what's needed in their community. But using those topics to create their own agenda. So from a technical perspective, this is pretty simple as well. All I would do then is literally open the 40 breakout rooms with a time boundary, usually. So open space technology does take a bit more time. Let me actually start at the beginning. So first and foremost, you need to ask people to brainstorm what are topics that they think are important to be discussed. And you give folks some time to write down their topic. Ironically, a virtual tool is kind of helpful for this one, but you can do it without it, and I'll explain how. After you've given people time to brainstorm the stuff they want to talk about, you would let that short list of people who have a topic take maximum 60 seconds to describe their topic, and then get some, actually for your virtual context, a show of hands of who is interested, doesn't matter. So basically you just go through the list of everybody who is interested in a topic, and 1 minute per person to describe it. For your constraint being 40 topics, because that's how many breakout rooms you could handle, what you would do is open breakout rooms for the duration that you want to use as a time boundary, say 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And you would have to name each breakout room the name of the topic. So if you're going to do Zoom, I think that should be doable. I think you can change the name of the breakout rooms in Zoom. But if you just say, you click on 2 options in particular. Number 1, give people the ability to change breakout rooms as they like, and change the name of the breakout room to the topic that's currently being addressed in that breakout room. Then you can handle many topics at the same time. And maybe it's too much to have all topics handled parallel, but if you have an hour, 2 hours, for example, you could split that into 4 chunks of 30 minutes, and you could handle several different topics. So that might leave you with only 10 different breakout sessions that might be pretty big, but different conversations could be happening in there, more or less. If you did say, it's also conceivable to say, oh, you might have 100 different topics going on. So 3 rounds of 30 minutes, 40 breakout rooms at a pop. You could actually say, hey, use the conversation cafe, regardless of what your topic is. And, all topics happen in pair, or, at any rate, I'm very confused, I notice. I'm speaking very confusingly. Right? You could run several sessions in parallel, all having conversation cafes around these different topics, and do several different rounds. So like 3 or 4 different scenes. Sherry, what's up? To address not being tech savvy, to have a separate free session on how and show them how to also for Eileen, to have a retrospective after the meeting with the stakeholders about where it went. Totes. Sounds like good ideas. Get feedback on what they think. Now, and one thing that also jumps out as a relatively simple structure that also has some similarities with Troika Consulting is this idea around 15% solutions. Yeah, so Sherry continues to get feedback from what they think and to help you with your nerves, and at least you're not in the dark word about what the experience was with folks in the room. 15% solutions, I think, is also an interesting structure. After you've done some amount of like, these are the challenges and some cross-pollination about what you could do. Discovery, action, dialogue. Fuck, I don't know why I didn't think of that one earlier. 15% solutions is very, what's your first step to implement some of the information that you've had, like, and you as an individual, right? 15% solutions. What do you got in the kitchen with no more time, no more resources, no more authority? What can you do to be the change, as it were? One other specific structure, which is very simple actually, and easy to guide, is the Discovery Action Dialogue, DAD. Discovery Action Dialogue splits people into smaller groups. 10 is perfectly functional for Discovery Action Dialogue. One person acts as the facilitator and just make sure that all of the 7 questions are gone through. Another person acts as the scribe and takes notes about the dialogue. And then the dialogue basically goes along the lines of, how do I know when insert, fill in the blank problem is present? What do I do to solve that problem personally? What prevents me from solving it all of the time? Who do I know that's particularly good at solving it? What do they do? Those are the questions. How might I integrate and do some of that stuff myself? So Discovery Action Dialogue for your challenge is actually fucking perfect now that I think about it, because across this community, there must be somebody out there who is not plagued with the challenge or has more functional ways of adapting to it. So Discovery Action Dialogue is all about surfacing positive deviance. And somebody's calling me on the phone at this very inconvenient time, and it's ringing in my headphones. So Discovery Action Dialogue is actually great. So those are the ones that come to mind. Eileen, you want to come back and tell us what you thought about that?
Yes, thank you so much. Can you tell me about this? Whoever shows up is right, whatever outcome is right. That sounds almost spiritual to me. So what are those principles?
Yep, those are the principles for open space technology. Open space technology. I'm trying to think where's a good place, because I didn't send you the link to this doc. So open space technology, if you just Google it, you will find it is an official liberating structure. It is motivated by those principles. Whoever shows up are the right people. Whenever it starts is the right time. Wherever it starts is the right place. Whatever happens is the only thing that could have happened. And whenever it's over, it's over. So those 5 principles plus this law of 2 feet. This law of 2 feet is the only rule, which is it's up to you as an individual to go to the place that maximizes your value. So if you're not, generally speaking, go to a session where you're either contributing actively or learning actively. And that's your responsibility to make sure that you're stewarding your time effectively.
Wow, I love that. It sounds like radical acceptance to me. Okay, so that's very helpful to get my head around this, because it is a really big task, and this is really a challenge for me. And I'm so grateful for the 15% solutions, the DAD, wise crowds. And I also thought of like celebrity interview for somebody who is important to them,
Yeah.
And so that's another idea. So anyway, I'm really relieved and calm, and yeah, it is what it is.
And I think discovery, action, dialogue, hands down, is probably pound for pound. If I think about that in the sort of the sequence of a string, so if you can identify like whatever you want to do, whether it's 1, 2, 4 all or Triz, or if you just want to poll your stakeholders to think about whatever the challenge du jour is, engaging people in discovery, action, dialogue around what are functional responses to that challenge is just super great. It's a great space of cross-pollination. And if you can think about collecting like the laundry list of names that are going to come up in these conversations about people that are better, and you'll have that because discovery, action, dialogue has a scribe, so you should have notes. And if you can think about then like gathering those people together for a particular celebrity interview, for a user experience Fishbowl, to like ask them questions, right? If you think about them as your celebrity group, that could be really powerful, because then it's grassroots information from the community for the community, right? And then we're just there offering structure to enable that sharing of knowledge.
Beautiful. Thank you. No, this is hugely helpful. And actually, there's really only a few things I can do, and that helps me to just focus on the few that you mentioned, structures, and because I was just looking at all 33 and getting lost. So this is very helpful.
Totally. Yeah, and then stick the landing with 15% solutions. Like I said, after people have heard from other people what good solutions are and look like, all right, what have you heard that you think you might be able to pull off for yourself? And then share that with just 1 or 2 other people and get some feedback about what they think. Get both the social validation of having shared, this is what I intend to do. It already creates some sense of like, oh shit, people are expecting me to do things. Some accountability, even if I never see them again. I did say it out loud. And get some encouragement, like, cool, you go for it. We have witnessed your intention to be a positive change, and we think that is awesome.
Beautiful. Okay, I got it. Thank you. You're incredibly helpful, both of you. Thank you so much.
Sweet.
Oh yeah, and linking people pleasing to that was a beautiful. I took a note on that. What was it? That we're trying to break away from what was that? What structure was that? Oh, the Conversation Cafe. And actually it's a way to kind of break through that people pleasing.
Word. Explicit rules.
By cutting people off or staying within the time constraint, I should say. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much. So helpful.
Sweet. Well, that is our time, folks. Thank you guys once more for hanging out.
Thank you. Thank you both.
You are the wise crowd. I don't have the I'm really, really, really working hard on this POAP thing to keep track of participation. So if you will both send me, I know Eileen, I have yours, but if you will send me your email here in the chat again, I can send you the claim link for that. Which also brings up another interesting point. You as well, Sherry, thank you so much. Which is when I send you these like claim links for these POAPs, are you claiming them to an email address or do you by chance have a wallet?
I think you had us get a wallet, but I'm not even sure.
Okay.
What do you prefer?
If you have a Web3 wallet, you haven't claimed any of them. Oh no. The claim links they do expire. I think they're only good for like 30 days.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep. So smoke them while you got them, but we'll figure out something. What was your question?
So you want us to have a wallet, is what you're saying?
A wallet is definitely, I have no idea actually technically what matters for their protocol, but a wallet does ensure, wallets are good. Yes, get a wallet, totally. As this experiment in wise crowds have, yeah, I know, right? So I'll have to figure something out. Okay, I guess shit over here. So we're in the midst of an experiment around decentralized autonomous organizations. And that experiment, you're participating with quite intensively. Both of you are, obviously, because you keep showing up. But this masterclass is designed in as well to create a distributed organization around that has everything it needs to further grow the practice of liberating structures. And so what so we're going to start playing around with over the course of this year the tools of Web3 and decentralized governance to try and like make some decisions and hopefully gather and hopefully accrue some resources that can enable us to focus explicitly on the spread of the practice. I mean, obviously, Eileen, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great things to spread the practice and use them. But for those of us that are interested in explicitly like teaching other people how to use liberating structures, then we want to create some form of basically define a sustainable business model about what that looks like and offer a specific toolkit to folks that they can use. So what we're playing around with in the playing is a strong word, but it's a good word. What we're playing around with in that learning journey is actually us prototyping the resources, the process and the method of like, oh, what do we think really good learning of liberating structures looks like, so that we can offer that basically to ourselves and to the community to say, here, use this. This seems to work to really help folks learn and provide that sense of confidence that we're looking for, that enables us to actually go out and use these things in real life. So yes, a wallet. There are lots of ways to get a wallet, a Web3 wallet. You can get one via MetaMask. You can get one via a hardware wallet if you really want to play the game. MetaMask is probably going to be sufficient for what we're playing.
I know I have one. You made us get one at some point, and it's I don't know how to connect it, so I'll work on that. But I have to fly, so thank you so much, both of you, for your help and care. Thank you.
For sure. Safe travels. Thanks, guys.